Welcome to Our Love podcast, where we share insights from top scientists and relationship experts on all things about love that are out of the box, refreshing, and new. Now sit back, grab a cold drink or hot one if you prefer, and enjoy today's episode.
Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Keely Sykes-Rawlings, co-host of our.love podcasts, where we visit with top experts in all things relationships. Today, we will be talking with Dr. Adia Gooden, who is a licensed clinical psychologist working with individuals and couples. She received her BA in psychology from Stanford University and her PhD in clinical community psychology from DePaul University. Dr. Adia served as a staff psychologist and the coordinator for multicultural outreach and support for the student counseling services at the University of Chicago. And she also served as the director of the clinic and community programs at the Family Institute at Northwestern before starting her own business. Dr. Adia specializes in providing therapy to people of color and is a sought-after dynamic speaker who gives talks on unconditional self-worth, imposter syndrome, and Black women and mental health. Dr. Adia gave a TED Talk on cultivating unconditional self-worth. She is also a podcast host, and she has online courses and programs designed to help people build healthy relationships with themselves and embrace their unconditional self-worth. Adia, welcome. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I'm happy to say I am one of the many viewers of your TED Talk. I loved it. Super informative. And I'm wondering if today we can start just really general. Can we just start with a definition of what is unconditional self-worth? Is it related to self-esteem, self-love? How is it different? What's the unconditional part?
Yeah, great question. So I conceptualize unconditional self-worth as the belief that you deserve to be alive, to be loved and cared for, and to take up space just because you're human. Mm-hmm. And I distinguish unconditional self-worth from self-esteem because I think of self-esteem and I think, the research and, people who are experts in the field of self-esteem talk about self-esteem as more about what we do in the world, our skills, our abilities, our accomplishments, what we believe we can achieve. And so I distinguish self-worth as, being more how we see ourselves as a human being versus a human doing. So regardless of what we're doing in the world, regardless of whether we're failing or succeeding, do we think we're worthy? Do we treat ourselves as worthy? Do we believe that we deserve love and care?
Yeah, great distinction. So what does that sound like verbally? I am worthy. I am okay.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think, one way that we can sort of practice self-worth, and it's a practice that I offer to clients and lots of folks that I support on the self-worth journey, is through self-compassion and particularly sort of the self-kindness, which looks like, that might be hard, but it's okay. I'm here for you. I'm here with you. I'm not throwing you away. I'm not abandoning you because you made a mistake or you had a failure, right? It's believing that you're worthy regardless. It could also look like, oh, wow, this is a really exciting job opportunity, or, oh, wow, I'm really excited to go on a date with this person. And I believe that I'm worthy of that. Right. And I'm not getting bogged down in, well, this is why you shouldn't get your hopes up. And this is why you're not worthy of it. And this is why you shouldn't go for it. And this is why blah, blah, blah. Not all of the self-criticism, but okay, I'm excited. I'm going to go for it. Right. And I believe that me as a human is good enough, is worthy for this positive experience.
Yeah. I love that. And I wonder for our listeners, if there is, are there ways that people can get to this idea of self-worthiness if they notice avenues that they're using to lift up their worth that are maybe unhealthy? Like the one that comes to mind for me that I see all the time in my practice is kind of coming through the avenue of achievement, right? I am worthy because I have this achievement, whether that's I went to a prestigious school, or I got an A on a paper, or I have this big house, or I have achieved something big at work, or I have a certain title at work, or I work at, some particular company. That's one area or avenue I see a lot. I'm curious to hear, well, I guess one, what do you think about that particular avenue? And then are there other avenues that people might identify that would maybe trigger them into thinking, oh, maybe there's another way to think about self-worth?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I certainly tried that achievement avenue for a long time. We just made the connection that I went to Stanford and your practice is very close to Stanford. So I'm sure you're seeing a lot of Stanford students, Stanford alums, grad students, people in the tech industry, right? And I spent years really saying, okay, this is it, right? If I just achieve this thing, then I'll be worthy. And the tricky part is that usually the bar always moves, right? So you get into Stanford, but then that's not good enough. So you better get perfect grades, but then that's not good enough. So then you better get an award, and that's not good enough. So you better get into grad school, and that's not good enough. So you better finish in 5 years, right? Like that was sort of my path until I defended my dissertation and realized pretty crushingly, like, oh, this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
Like this, I've sort of taken it to the end, right? Like the ultimate academic achievement. And it's not, and it isn't doing it. It isn't giving me what I need, what I want. It's not filling that hole. And so I think so many people go down this path, and that path is laid out for us by society and our parents that say, just get a good job, just get an education, do well in school, get a good job, and then you'll be happy, right? That's how it's sort of laid out for us. And well-intended, but then you do those things and you're like, well, but that isn't making me feel worthy, or I'm not experiencing sustained happiness. So that's certainly an avenue. I think people also use romantic relationships as another thing. That's another thing that I've tried on my journey, is sort of this believing that if I could just find someone to choose me, to love me, then that would prove that I was worthy and lovable. But the problem was that as long as I didn't feel worthy, I was, first of all, attracting and being attracted to partners who did not have the capacity to love me fully. And when I was with partners who very much loved me, I couldn't really take it in. Either I was sort of bored, like, you're not making me prove it, you're not making me work for it, so I'm kind of bored, or I was skeptical, or I was anxious and I just pushed it away, right? So that's another, it's sort of this trap that you both want a partner to prove that you're worthy, but then your own disbelief that you are worthy keeps you from a loving, fulfilling relationship. So those are two main ones. People use appearance, certainly. People use status, right? Social class and status and markers of those. There are lots of things that people use to try to prove their worth from the outside in.
So, and I love the way you said that, from the outside in, because I think you're making the distinction between self-worth coming from outside in, which is potentially, again, for the listeners to review the four that you named, appearance, status, doing and achieving, and what was your fourth? Relationships. Yeah. So if we can recognize, oh, maybe I'm trying to get at it from that avenue, that's outside in. And the distinction you're making is self-worth actually should come from the inside out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I really like that. Yeah. Oh, and I'm excited to talk a little bit more about how that then relates to love and relationships. But before we go there, let me first say thank you for sharing those pieces of your story. That's so helpful. And so helpful, I think, for all of us to recognize this kind of common humanity right? We all have stories of our self-worth journey that relate back to how we were brought up, the environments that we were brought up in, our schooling, the messages we got from society. And I think that it's so helpful to think about self-worth as almost like a dimmer switch, right? A light with a dimmer switch. Self-worth is like a light switch, and it's either on or off. So they come into the office, they want to learn unconditional self-worth. And the belief is, well, if I just learn it, the light switch will go on and I'll have it and I'm good to go. I'm fixed. And the way I sometimes think about it is that it's a dimmer switch. It's sort of, kind of, it can come on, it can dim, it can get bigger, it can get smaller. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that. How do you approach unconditional self-worth?
Yeah. So I like the dimmer switch metaphor. And I tend to sort of think of it as we all have a light within us that we're born with, right? That, you're born with as a baby, and nobody would question whether or not a baby is worthy unconditionally. And then we have these experiences in our lives that sort of cover over the light. I don't think it can go out, right? I don't think. And so if we took the dimmer switch metaphor, we'd say, even if the light is off, right? Even if the dimmer is turned all the way off, the electricity is still there. Right? It isn't cut off. It's just how do you tune back into it? Right. Yeah. And so if we took my metaphor with the light, it's like, okay, did it get covered over by a trauma, by a difficult experience, by something that said, right? Like, did that dim your light in the sense of it's getting covered over? And how do we sort of uncover it? Right. So there's some pieces that are sort of, how do you dismantle some of the narratives that you started buying into, maybe because of trauma, maybe because of a difficult experience, maybe because of, a failure, right?
Yep.
And then there's also these sort of practices that I offer to people, which are around, how do you turn that light on, right? If we're using the dimmer switch, and I frame them as practices because sort of as you're saying, when we go through life, there may be times when we feel really grounded in our self-worth, and then something may happen. We may lose a job or a role may shift or change. And that may awaken us to the fact that some of our self-worth was dependent on that role, right? It was a little bit more self-esteem-y, and we may have to return to some of these practices to remind ourselves that we're still worthy, even with the lost job, right? And really reground ourselves. And so, I think of these practices as ways of treating ourselves, ways of seeing ourselves. And I think that's important because often with self-worth, people are sort of saying, well, just believe you're worthy. And I think a lot of people are like, well, if I could, I would, but like, that's not just saying I'm worthy isn't causing it to sink in. And so I think of, okay, even if you don't feel worthy, could you treat yourself as though you are? Could you show up for yourself? Could you be kind to yourself? Could you do engage in some of these practices that remind you of your worthiness, even if you're not feeling it at the moment?
Yeah. And in my experience, sort of people sort of like the dimmer goes down, right? The switch goes down. They lose maybe that self-worthiness when, like you're saying, they've lost a job or the girlfriend breaks up with them, right? And it's sort of this moment of awakening to, oh, I was going at self-worth through this achievement path, or I was going to self-worth through this relationship path. Yeah. Can you share some of those practices with us?
Yeah, sure. So there are a few sort of core practices that I tend to talk about. One is forgiving yourself, because I think often the things that dim the light are things that we do that we don't feel good about, that we're struggling with, we feel ashamed of. And we say, well, maybe I would be worthy if I hadn't had that failure, or if I hadn't made that mistake, or if I hadn't ruined that relationship. But since I did that, that's it. I'm not worthy. Right. And so the process of self-forgiveness can help people to move out of that space where they feel like this thing makes me unworthy, and into, okay, I made this mistake. I had this failure. I, made a misstep. And how do I learn from it? How do I understand where I was and what led to that? How do I grow from it? How do I pull the wisdom and allow myself to move forward? So that's one
beautiful
practice that I talk about.
So recognizing everyone makes mistakes, then taking some accountability, and then learning from it to better yourself. And that,
yes.
and boy, is that hard for perfectionists.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Any other practices that you could share with us?
Yeah. Another one I talk a lot about is self-compassion. And there actually is some research out there that self-compassion does bolster or boost a sense of self-worth. And so self-compassion has sort of three core practices, which are mindfulness, right? Slowing down to get curious about how you're feeling and what you're thinking without judgment. Common humanity, remembering that you're human, right? You mentioned the common humanity before, and that, right, humans are not perfect. It's okay not to be perfect. It's okay to have a hard time or to struggle. And then self-kindness, right? So replacing that inner criticism and that self-critical voice with kindness, right? How would you talk to a friend? How would you talk to a child? How would you talk to a loved one? And offering that same kindness and care to yourself.
Yeah. Beautiful. Really beautiful. So if we're going to connect self-worth to this idea of having a loving relationship, do you feel like it's essential to have good, unconditional, healthy self-worth before partnering?
So what I'll say is this. I don't think that you have to be like, I am perfectly grounded in my worthiness before you consider dating, because I think that's sort of unreasonable. I do think that we are more likely to have healthy relationships if we are on a path of embracing our unconditional self-worth when we're, in those relationships, entering into them. I know for me, things really shifted in terms of my dating and relationships once I was grounded in my self-worth, right? If I think about the relationships and the dating experiences I had when I was anxious and felt unlovable and did not feel worthy, the quality of those relationships, and, I was dating pretty good people, right? Like they weren't awful people, was very different from my relationship with my now husband, right? And how I engaged in that from a place of knowing that I was worthy felt very different for me than the anxiety that used to really characterize my dating. Does he like me? Does he want to go on a date with me? Am I good enough? How do I prove that I'm good enough? How do I do that? Right. Like that was really a common dynamic in my relationships, and that shifted. So I don't want to say like, you have to be finished with this journey and like, check this box before you ever enter a relationship. But I have seen in my own life, I've seen it in clients' life, I've seen it in couples that I've worked with, that when people are not attending to how they see themselves and how they treat themselves and how they feel about themselves, that can be a big challenge for a romantic relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, right, we come back to this idea of sort of, if you're on the self-esteem journey, you might be in one place with it where it's really strong and you feel really good and you're very solid in that. And then you get into a relationship and the relationship itself sort of brings up issues around sort of issues around worthiness that maybe weren't there before, just by the nature of whatever this person kind of brings, right? So you have person A, maybe feeling pretty worthy, person B feeling pretty worthy, both on their own journeys. And then they get together and they create some sort of dynamic that sort of rocks the boat in some way. Yeah. How do you work with couples when one or potentially both people are struggling with the self-worthiness?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a challenge.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think in some of the couples that I've worked with, I can see how one partner is doing the best they can to really show that they love and appreciate their partner. And the partner who's struggling with self-worth really has a hard time taking it in.
Yeah.
Like it's almost never good enough. It's almost never enough. And intellectually, they might be able to say, yes, you are an amazing, loving, caring partner, but emotionally, it still doesn't feel that way. And so I think the challenge in couples work is to not get too into individual work. So sometimes it's providing some frameworks and some strategies and practices that will benefit both partners, sort of like what I've been talking about with self-compassion and things like that. And then also encouraging partners to do some of this work in their individual therapy, or to seek out an individual therapist where they really can dig in to their personal history and narratives around self-worth, which we can talk about some in the context of a couple, but it's a little harder to do some of that deep work in the couples therapy context.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if that self-worth piece, well, let me actually back up and say it this way. Here's how couples often enter my office. Couple comes in, they both take 5 or 10 minutes saying, my partner does this, and it is not okay. And then the other partner takes their 5 or 10 minutes and says, well, you think that's bad. Well, listen to what my partner does with me. And I'm wondering if there's a connection between that kind of blame game and self-worth. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think so, right? So I think often the way we judge and blame our partners is a reflection of the way we judge and blame ourselves.
Oh, yes, beautiful.
And I think when people are struggling with self-worth challenges, they're usually also experiencing a lot of self-criticism. And there isn't room for what's going on with me, what's going on with you, right? Or compassion, right? And so that's one thing. And the other thing is, again, if we're trying to use a partner to fill a void, then it's really upsetting when they do not do that. Yeah. And it's not, and in the couple framework, it's you're doing it wrong. You shouldn't be doing it like this. I don't know. You're making me feel this way. And part of, as like our work as couples therapists is to say, okay, how is this a joint sort of venture, right? Like how are both of you contributing to this dynamic versus it's all one person's fault or all another person's fault. But when we're in the framework of you're supposed to be making me feel loved and me feel worthy, and you're not doing it, and that's making me angry. And really, it's actually making me scared, but I'm going to come with the anger. Right. And I criticize myself constantly and I don't feel worthy. And then I'm going to put that on you. Then we just have this whole mess, right? That the couples therapist is there to help untangle, because so much can get mixed in there when people don't feel worthy, people don't feel lovable, when, self-worth is outsourced to another partner who may or may not know what your needs are, what you want. You may not be communicating that. And then you're angry that they're not doing the thing that makes you feel good or that you think will make you feel better.
And even a step further, I think so many people don't even know what their wants and needs are, right? So they can tell you, well, my partner doesn't fill this void. But the next step is, I think in the work sometimes, well, what is that void? Why is it there? Mm-hmm. And what am I looking to get from my partner? And what you're saying is, sure, a partner can help in that journey, but what can you give yourself to fill that void?
Yes. Yeah. Right. And it doesn't mean that you don't ask for things of your partner, right? It doesn't mean that you're hyper independent and I don't need anything from you. But when you're sort of grounded in, I provide myself love and care, and I can ask you for that, right? Then it's a more balanced relationship. And I think you're right that a lot of people don't know what they need. I think often I sort of have this framework of in relationships, people can go into this almost like infancy mode. Like I'm crying. And you should just know what I need. I need to be fed. I need to be changed. I need to sleep. Right? Like you expect the partner, and it's like, okay, that's okay for infants because they cannot do anything but cry.
Right.
But as adults, if we don't feel that our needs are worthy, if our needs have never been attended to by a parent, by a friend, by a family member, or by us, then it can feel very scary to say, I need this from you. And so instead of saying that, because we may not know how to articulate it, we may not know what we need because we're not even tuned in, we just say, I'm uncomfortable. I don't like this right now. So I'm going to cry or I'm going to tantrum. And you should have figured out how to prevent this. Right. And it's the other partner might be like, I didn't know what was going on with you. Right. And so it's like, how do we get to even, I'm going to tune into my needs, which is part of I think there's a core piece around self-worth, which is building a healthy relationship with yourself.
Yes.
Right. So tuning into yourself, paying attention to yourself, right. Being curious about yourself, because if you can attend to your own needs, then you're going to be better able to ask a partner to show up for you in the way that would be most helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. And you included 2 of the 7 love skills in that comment, one being curiosity, which I think is so important for development, individually and in a relationship, right? Being curious with yourself and being curious with and about the other person. And then the second being vulnerable. And being vulnerable means, to me, being able to say, I have this need. Here is my heart. Can you hold this with me?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Boy, you can see how this could go so wrong if someone comes to relationships with the idea that this other person is going to fulfill this. Yeah.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about your own journey. And I was listening to one of your podcasts where you talked about relationship anxiety. Can you talk a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I was sort of generally an anxious person. Thankfully, I'm not anymore, thanks to therapy and doing this work. But so I had anxiety some about academics. But the thing about academics is like, I could control that pretty much.
Yep. Yeah, you
study hard, work hard, get this assignment in. Like I kind of knew I was, somebody who's like blessed to do well academically and for that structure to work for me. So I knew how to work that. But relationships, you cannot control the other person.
Yeah.
So for me, I would get into these dating situations and it was like, once I decided, and I usually decided pretty quickly that I liked someone. And often that was dependent on, do they like me? Okay, great. I like them. Right. There wasn't a lot of examination of like, is this a good fit? Do I really like how I feel around them? Then it was, okay, I've chosen them. Are they going to choose me? Are they going to choose me? Are they choosing me? Are they texting me? Are they not texting me? Are we spending time? Do they want to spend time with me? Are they being affectionate? Are they right? Like,
yes, my heart's racing.
And I'm saying it like that because it's like, that's how it felt. It felt very anxiety. And because my self-worth was at stake.
Yeah.
Because it mattered so much. It wasn't just, yes, it would be disappointed for this person I'm interested in to decide, hey, we're not a great fit. It was, what will this mean about me as a person? Pressure on the dating relationships that I sort of ignored the fact that I should be paying attention to whether or not this person was a good fit for me, whether or not I actually enjoyed the relationship, right? That was sort of like not even important. It was, I need to be chosen. And then I would engage in behaviors that were not great for the relationship, right? Constant reassurance. Can I have constant reassurance? And what does this mean? And, it's like, so you then you muck up the relationship in the process to try to soothe your own anxiety. And then you end up sort of recreating and reinforcing this narrative that you're not lovable, that people aren't going to choose you because you're doing these things that push people away or frustrate people. And then you say, see, I'm unlovable. Somebody else left. Somebody else didn't choose me.
Yeah. And then reaffirm that belief. And again, if you're going from the outside in, then you take in those negative thoughts those negative affirmations, right? Those negative things that you can say about yourself in relationship to this other person, which creates toxicity.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can do some of the self-worth work first, like you had said, right, being on that journey, then you can start from a much stronger place. And maybe the conversation with the partner would sound like, I have this need to know that you are there for me.
Mm-hmm.
I need potentially a morning text to know that you are there for me. Can we negotiate together some way for me to know that you are still there? We are still connected, rather than kind of how you described it with all of the anxiousness and the scared and the, I guess maybe sometimes even demanding that sets the partner on the defensive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Because there can be a feeling of you're not doing enough. Yeah. Right. And then the partner could feel like, I've been dating for 2 months. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. Right. But it's my anxiety. And if I don't know how to soothe myself, right, because that's really like what I often talk about is, okay, it's when I used to get activated, what it really was the little one in me. It was little Adia saying, we can't do this, they might reject us again. We can't do it. Oh my gosh, and it's like, she needed to be soothed. And it's really powerful and empowering for me to now know how to soothe her. And I can ask my partner, right? I could say, hey, I'm feeling anxious. I would really appreciate some communication or some soothing to remind me that you do still love me, or we are still connected. But that's very different than like going to them and being like, do you hate me? Do you hate me? I don't, right? Like acting out of the little one, the little space, the 5-year-old, the 8-year-old, right? And so instead it's like, okay, I need some soothing. I'm going to offer myself some soothing. And then I'm going to ask my partner to support me in that, to help me with that, is such a different approach than the either like freaking out and your partner's like, where did this come from? I just didn't text you for 3 hours and I was in a meeting, right? Or the like, what I would also sometimes do is just like, well, I'm done. They don't like me. That's it.
Yeah.
Right. Like shut down, move away. Yeah. And I think a lot of people have the reaction because it feels so scary and we don't know why it feels so scary. And it's like, well, it's probably something that started when we were a lot younger.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there behavioral, you talked about meditation and mindfulness. Are there behavioral techniques that you use with folks to self-soothe? I love that idea. I mean, even the phrase, right? Self-soothe. Oh, that just sounds so wonderful. Are there other things other than meditation or mindfulness that you use?
Yeah. So, I often encourage people to like put a hand on their chest. You might give yourself a hug because physically, right, we're mammals. And often what we need is physical touch. And sometimes there is somebody there that can give us a hug, but sometimes there isn't. And so putting a hand on your chest, giving yourself a hug, you might just even say, right? Like, oh, right. So imagine, I encourage people to imagine, how would you comfort a crying baby, a puppy, or your favorite baby animal, or a little kid, right? And usually it's very different than how we respond to ourselves when we're upset. Because often what people do when they're upset is, why are you so upset? You should get over it. I don't even understand. Why'd you even think they were going to do, right? Like we start beating ourselves up. It just makes it worse. So if instead you can say, oh my gosh, that was so, you didn't hear from them for hours and you just went down a rabbit hole and you thought they were gone forever. And that was so scary. It's okay. It's okay.
So what you're saying is, to first have acceptance for the feeling that we're having, whether that's sad or scared, worried, fear, and then physically, touch your chest, give yourself a hug, assure yourself that the feeling is okay, that you're okay. And for people who have a hard time doing that, you gave the suggestion of thinking about being with a puppy or their favorite animal, or potentially a child, or maybe even their inner child, right? Like me at age 5, what would I go back and say to that little scared, well, I was actually age 3, that little scared preschooler, right? That was scared to go into this big new world of other people and other kids and loud and all of that. Yeah. And being able to say, it's okay. You're okay. I'm here.
Yes.
I love that. I love the idea of physical touch and physical touch with ourselves. And sometimes, sure, we can get that from our partner, but being able to do it again, here we go, inside out, being able to do that for ourselves. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. This has been amazing. But before we end, is there anything you'd like to share? You want to let us know where we can find you on the internet?
Sure. So for those people who are kind of curious about some of these practices I've talked about, I have a free ebook that has 4 practices to get you started on your self-worth journey. And you can sign up to receive that on my website, which is dradiagooden.com/free with 3 E's. So FREEE-book. So that's one thing. And I'm also on Instagram at Dr. Adia Gooden. I post a lot of things about self-worth. And you're welcome to also check out my website, dradiagooden.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. This has been amazing.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yep. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Our Love podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's topic. Please be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and give us a 5-star rating to help others find us. We'll see you again next week, and we hope that you are experiencing your best love today.